I think we're on.
Oh, it's the other way around. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us this morning's session.
I hope everyone's getting used to this platform. Thank everyone who helped organize this Nishmat conference, and thank all the sponsors. I know it's been a difficult couple days for the Jewish people, and I was coming from the Tillim just now. I was already a few minutes behind schedule, and I know a lot of different thoughts on people's minds right now. We just wanted to, of course, express our current tefillos go to all the families and the victims and everyone who still needs refuah. In some ways, this conference, which is focused on relationships, is an important topic at all times, and particularly right now. So, all right, with that, we'll get started. Okay. Everyone see?
Share the screen.
Okay, let's try to share again. 1 second. Bear with us. Hold on 1 second. Can you see?
Yeah.
No, they don't see. Can you see the slide?
No, it's delayed.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, good. Everyone can see the slides? Okay. All right. So welcome to our topic this morning is zooming in and zooming out, interpersonal relationships in our time. This past year, since the beginning of COVID and continuing, we saw a different side of the people that we live with, being forced quarantine, social distancing. It forced a different kind of understanding of relations with other people, how we connect to other people, how we talk to other people. And some of these changes may be here for a long time. The fact that we're doing this over Zoom, the fact that we're not Zoom, sorry to the platform that we're using. The fact that we're doing this remotely, there's something that may be here to change, be here to stay. Even we could do in person, such changes may be here. And what we wanted to explore this morning is how some of our interpersonal relationships has changed. We're talking about the topic not because people don't learn it like people do other talks, although it's true, but it's because we don't always think about it the way we should. We don't think that's something we need to work on. Often we talk about working on our tefillah, on our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, our relationship with Hashem, and our social lives and how we relate to people that we live with. That's kind of put to the side. Oh, you'll figure that out. That's more natural. But like everything in this world, it requires us to focus on and develop skills for it. And that's coming. We know that as we teach in our shul, that just as we speak to people, there was a kind of a shift in how we understand what it means to speak to other people. And some of the questions that we got as Rabbi and Rebbitzin at Mount Sinai, and in Racheli's role as a teacher and my role at YU, there was a shift. Things changed. And so we wanted to explore that a little further. Again, our title, Zooming In and Zooming Out, pun being Zoom, but taking a closer look at personal relationships and also kind of a backstage look at it.
And even as we begin to emerge from the pandemic and a life of quarantine and curfew hopefully is behind us, this is still a worthwhile conversation. It's not just limited to the past few months that we've lived through, but this is a worthwhile conversation. And there are constantly relevant mitzvos regarding interacting in the world that we live in with other people.
So there's been a lot of memes about working from home in the past. And again, as I said, even if this may be here to stay, hopefully meme culture is here to stay. That certainly helped me get through the past couple months. That's been very, very good to have. So this is a meme that we saw when I used to dream about working from home, me now working from home. And again, it's kind of what we imagined what things were going to be like and how they've changed. And again, teaching in every possible method, every possible way of interacting with people has changed. So this is just one idea. Again, you can find thousands of these online that share that kind of relate to this feeling that we've had, and about people with roommates, with people they live with. There was a whole series of memes or lines people they discover what it was like with their partner, with their spouse, with their roommate, what kind of person they are at work. We often don't see the people that we live with, we don't see what they're like at work. Now we find out the phrases they use. Some of the pet peeves that we have with our coworkers, sometimes our spouse, our partner, our friend has those also. So again, what we want to look at this morning is maybe some tips and some tools for how to get through when, again, our relationships have changed and what that will mean for the future.
So the most essential pasuk for the mitzvah of interpersonal relationships is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And because these are mitzvot, these are laws that are often overlooked, let's start from the very beginning, from the source in the Torah, and let's read this pasuk carefully. The phraseology interpretation of this pasuk itself can really give us important insights. So the pasuk in Vayikra Yoetzet Parak Yudches, Lo sikom v'lo sitor es b'nei amecha v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Hashem. You should not take vengeance. You should not bear a grudge. And you should love your fellow as yourself. I am Hashem. So we see that the source of the mitzvah, the basis of interpersonal relationships, v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, is from this pasuk, but it's really part of, there's a few mitzvos in this pasuk. Don't take revenge, don't bear a grudge. And for now, and really for our talk for the next few minutes, we're going to focus on the last part, v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, this third mitzvah, which has multiple understandings. And our goal for today is to explain how understanding v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, both on a biblical interpretation level, as well as in our daily life. And hopefully we'll also be learning some advice, and we'll be sharing some case studies, for lack of a better word, how we have guided people over the past few months in how when their world shifted and how this mitzvah and the way we interact with people changed as well. So what does this phrase, v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, really mean? So I want to specifically focus on the terms v'yahavta, reacha, kamocha. So v'yahavta, on this word, the Sforno says, v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, ahov be'ei reacha, ma shehayisa ohev ba'odacha, im hayisa magia limkomo. That this pasuk, this mitzvah, follows a general, all-inclusive rule to be observed in relationships towards our peers. And it's phrased as v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha. And the Sforno says that this tells us what this means is that we should apply the same yardstick of our concern for our friends that we would want to apply to ourselves if we were in our friends' shoes in a similar situation. Now, on the word l'reacha, the Ibn Ezra makes a grammatic point. And he says, the pasuk says, lireacha, meaning to your friends. And it would have actually been sufficient and possibly even clearer to say, v'yahavta reacha, love your neighbor. So why does it say the lamed, which in that prefix is used to mean to? That this lamed letter actually seems superfluous. And the Ibn Ezra explains that it's actually not superfluous, and he goes on to give other examples of other terms where the lamed is used and doesn't have a deeper meaning. And he says really what this phrase means is that you should love that which is good for your friends, for your neighbor, as you do for yourself. And now another term in the pasuk is also re'acha, that many spend a lot of time discussing. Like, what does it refer to? Who is considered a friend? And according to some, re'acha refers only to Jews. And in fact, this view can be supported by the context itself, where the pasuk and really the preceding psukim before this pasuk refer to Jewish people. You should not hate your brother in your heart. We're referring to people in Am Yisrael. You should not take revenge or feel resentment against B'nei Amecha that we saw earlier in the pasuk. You should love Re'acha as yourself. So it seems that the context really is referring to those within the Jewish people. And then on the other hand, we have in Sefer Shemos, Parak Yud Aleph, pasuk Bet, where B'nei Yisrael, before leaving Mitzrayim, before leaving Egypt, they are instructed to ask their Egyptian neighbors for silver and gold. And in that context also, you have the words Re'ah, Re'ehu, Re'usa are used, which is clearly a reference to the Egyptians. And furthermore, one of the Seres Hadibros of the Ten Commandments instructs us not to desire the friend of our Rea. And we're actually going to come back to that mitzvah and what that Seres Hadibros as well. So now, does that mean that we're allowed to covet the wives of non-Jews and only Jews? Of course not. And so understanding the term of Re'acha in this way, these are really arguments against narrowing the term that Re'ah only means someone within Bnei Yisrael. And finally, the term kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. And this word highlights the fact that you and your neighbor are different. Your neighbor is in fact not you, but you should still love him like yourself. And the Malbim explains that everyone, all humans were created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And this is the highest form of creation, as it contains the souls of all mankind. And all people are like one person, the Malbim says, just like one body that has different limbs. Everyone, all of mankind, is composed of different people. And that there is a connection between Re'acha, between your friend, and you, kamocha. We are in fact all connected, and we're similar even in just a basic way of the foundation of the creation of mankind. Now, setting aside that, academic and biblical interpretation, on a halachic level, this mitzvah is codified by the Sefer HaChinuch. And his mitzvah, Reish Mem Gimel, number 243, which he titles as Mitzvah Ahavas Yisrael.
Bring it on screen. So the Sefer HaChinuch, it's one of my personal favorite Sfarim. It's an unknown authorship. Still some debates about exactly who wrote it. Not totally understood. But the Sefer HaChinuch is a list of the mitzvos by order of the Parsha. He more or less follows the Rambam's list of the mitzvos in terms of what constitutes the 613 mitzvos. But one of his innovation, his main innovation, was to organize the mitzvos according to the Parshas HaShavua. And sometimes he rephrased them in certain ways that can be instructive. So as mitzvah Reish Mem Gimel, which he calls mitzvah Avas Yisrael, the mitzvah of the love of Jewish people, of Yisrael, you can see it on screen in both Hebrew and English. He describes this mitzvah Avos kol echad mi Yisrael avas nefesh, to love each person, love the soul of each one of Israel. Interesting why he calls it avas nefesh, but something going beyond just the person, loving their soul, loving who they are. Kolomar shenimcha Yisrael b'mono k'moshem choma atzmo umono. That a person should have compassion for another Jew and for his money, just like a person has compassion for himself. And he goes on to explain. He quotes a line that we'll come back to in a moment. Don't do unto others, do not have others do unto you. This is the idea of the mitzvah. And he quotes the Sifra, the Medrash Halacha and Vayikra, Amr Bekiva Zeklal Gadol Batorah. This is an important principle in the Torah. And he explains why is it an important principle in the Torah. Kolomar, Shaharbe Mitzvah Shabbatorah Tluyim Bakach. Many different mitzvahs are connected to it. This is an interesting principle when it comes to mitzvahs. Sometimes we have a mitzvah that tells us a specific thing to do, right? There's a mitzvah that tells us you have to do X. You have to eat matzah on Pesach. You have to daven. It's a particular activity. Other mitzvahs are more general categories. They define how we're general things we're supposed to do in our life. For example, we think of the idea of Devekas. Sometimes it's a Hasidic concept, or if you're of a certain age, remembering the albums, the old Devekas albums, the music they used to have. But Devekas is also a mitzvah. We have a mitzvah to cling to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's not necessarily one particular act that fulfills Devekus, that fulfills this mitzvah to cling to Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's a general category of activities and behavior and a mindset we're supposed to have. So V'ahavta L'recha Kamocha incorporates many different mitzvahs, many different categories. As interesting aside, one of the mitzvos that, according to some, is incorporated into V'ahavta L'recha Kamocha is the prohibition of doing damages to another person. People will perhaps have learned either in Daf Yomi or in Yeshiva. Otherwise, we know a lot of halacha, a lot of Mishnayos and the Gemara are about what happens when you damage someone else's property. The Masechtas of Baba Kama, Baba Batzi, and Baba Basra are a lot about damaged property and the rights of someone else's. What if if I take something from someone else, if I steal, etc. So while theft is clearly prohibited in the Torah, There's many psukim related to that. There is no specific pasuk that says that I may not damage someone else's property. It tells what happens if I damage someone else's property. If I actively damage it, if something that I do, if my property damages your property. There's plenty of psukim that dictate that, but there's no specific pasuk that says I may not damage someone else's property, which seems strange. And it'd be a little strange to say, oh, you're allowed to, you just have to pay someone back. That'd be a little bit of a strange concept. I was allowed to break someone else's stuff, and I have to pay back for it, but there's no prohibition of doing it. So some have located the prohibition for doing this in the midst of that the reason I'm not allowed to damage someone else's property, not only do I have to pay back someone if I damage their property, but I'm also not allowed to, is because of this principle that I can't do unto others what others do unto me, that since I would not want my property damaged, I cannot damage someone else's property. If I do, I violate this mitzvah say. I violate this. That's how many explain this, put that under. Not everyone agrees with that, but that's how many explain. The Gemara in Shabbos, which is also alluded to in the Sefer HaChinuch, tells a somewhat well-known story. There was a story involving a non-Jew who came in front of Shammai, and he said to Shammai, he says, convert me, but only on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while standing on one leg. It's become a bit of a phrase, a regel achas. Tell me what's going on. What's the hak, a regel achas? Tell me what's happening while standing on one leg. And Beishamai threw him away, interesting what his response was. Perhaps another time we'll talk about that. But Hillel, he came in front of, and he said, again, same thing, convert me on condition that you teach me the entire Torah on one leg. And Hillel respond, don't do unto other people that which hateful you, do not do to another. That is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. The rest of it is interpretation. So in the story, we clearly see what does it mean? It means don't do bad to other people. Things that you wouldn't want happening to you, you shouldn't do to others. That is the mitzvah. Again, Hillel says that's the entire Torah, and that also perhaps what makes it Zeklal Gadol B'Torah is because this is the entire Torah in some ways. Don't do what to someone else what you wouldn't want them doing to you. And so what we'd like to, based on this idea, we'd like to explore, this is not just a drasha, not just a musar, and how this is actually a useful principle in interpersonal relationships. Maybe something obvious, but as we've come to learn in our role as Rabbi and Rebbitzin, not everything's obvious, and sometimes we actually can, using the principles here, using interpretation of the pasuk, using interpretation of the mitzvah, is actually useful advice that we've given to other people. So we'd like to go now to our first case study.
Okay, so this case study probably started, hey, Rabbi. And someone called us and said, my roommate is literally a grouch every single morning, and I can't figure out why. And this, when someone confronted me with this sort of question and looking for guidance, it literally came out as like a statement. I'm like, I'm at a loss. And again, as we sort of introduced our talk, and what's really underlying all these questions is in light of the year of COVID and in time of quarantine and shutdown and curfew. And interpersonal relationships are really stressed at this time. And so someone came and said, I don't know what to do. Every morning we have like the same really negative interactions with the people that I live with. And so as with, in many cases that require, some sort of like pastoral counseling, we talked this out and just became this listening ear. And to get more details, how long have you known your roommate for? When did you start realizing that your morning routine there was a lot of tension in that morning routine? And that was sort of like that light bulb where there was something wrong in this morning routine that came recently, meaning before COVID, January, February of 2020, there was fine. And then also the person we were talking to also shared, like they're usually out by 7:30 in the morning, jumping on the train to get to their job in downtown Brooklyn. And they didn't see their roommate in the morning. And it was then talking about, okay, now that you're living together, so what's your morning routines looking like? What does your roommate's morning routine look like in light of the fact that their work has changed and in light of the fact that they're working from home? And going back to that meme with that little girl, crying as she's coloring of what the reality is of working from home. And so what came out of this conversation was that talking to the person was that she said that she goes on her Peloton, these stationary bikes, and turns on her TV, goes on to the their Peloton platform to do a live ride. She tries to do them when they're live, doesn't like doing the recordings. And so then we sort of spoke about, and what's your roommate doing at that time? Oh, my roommate's still in the room, and my roommate's still sleeping, because even though she would be out of the house by 8:00 in the morning, but now she's sleeping until closer to 9 because she just has to turn on her computer at 9:01 to clock in. And so in this case, right, when we sort of fleshed out the details of what is causing the tension, is that, well, you're waking up your roommate 2 hours before they need to wake up. And that's why when your roommate finally comes out of the room after twisting and turning for an hour and a half, because you woke them up an hour and a half too early. And what we realized was that in this case, the fulfillment of the mitzvah, the ahavta l'reacha kamocha, was simply, so don't blast the TV as early as 7 a.m., waking up your roommate, right? Sort of this action was what we call like a sor meirah, right? Like moving away from, don't do something bad. And whether this meant that this person didn't exercise in the morning or used headphones when they were doing the ride, that little small action, although it took time, it wasn't so obvious at first, just doing that action of stopping to do something that was hurting and bothering the other person, this helped fulfill the mitzvah and rebuilt that strained relationship. And so it took a few moments to take a step back, to zoom out, again, going back to our pun of the title of this talk. And it required a few minutes to think about and to talk about what you're doing and to stop that harmful behavior. And thinking, kamocha, if you were sleeping late, you wouldn't want to be woken up by the noise of a TV or the noise of the bicycle, mechanics waking you up earlier than you had to. And yet this doesn't end the mitzvah, because as this might even be an obvious step, although sometimes still a little hard to do, but this is just the step of not doing. As I said, it's the sor meirav.
But this can't be the whole story, as Racheli said, because v'yavrecha kamocha is a mitzvah aseh. It's a positive mitzvah. The Ramban, in his commentary on the pasuk, kind of challenges this approach to the mitzvah in saying, if it was just about don't do to others what you wouldn't have others do to you, that's a mitzvah los aseh. That's a negative commandment. But this is clearly framed in the aseh. He doesn't think that can be really the entire mitzvah, despite that's what the Sifra says. He said it's strange for a mitzvah aseh to be phrased just in the negative. He asks further that it doesn't seem to work with the Gemara in Bab Metzia, also somewhat well-known Gemara in Bab Metzia, that Rav Yochanan said, quotes the pasuk, "B'chai yechicha mach," your brother shall live with you. What does this teach us? So it tells a story of two people who were walking in the desert, and they only had one thing of water. There was only enough water for one of them. If they both drank from the water, they would both die. So what are you supposed to do in that situation? So Ben Batura said, okay, they both drink and they'll both die. Neither one of them will have to watch or cause, you might say, the death of the other. Rabbi Kiva says, no, your life, your life comes before your friend's life, and therefore you drink the water. And thus the Ramban says, clearly there's no idea of loving someone else as much as you love yourself. That can't be, because if I love the other person, how could I possibly keep the water for myself? And the Ramban takes us a step further and says, from a psychological perspective, it is impossible for someone to love someone else the way they love themselves. It's not possible I would want that person to be alive at the expense of my own life. It's just not possible. Rabbi Kiva's svara here goes beyond the specific situation. It speaks to an emotional or psychological reality, the impossibility of loving someone else in the same way that you love someone else. And the Ramban therefore posits a different approach. What is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? It means that I want my friend to be successful. The same way I want success in my life. I want financial success. I want family success. Whatever success means to me, I desire myself to be in the positive, to be successful. I should want that for my friend. And I should not to the same degree. It doesn't mean that everything I get, I automatically want my friend to have, or if there's a choice of me getting something, my friend getting it, that I'm going to want my friend to get it over me. That's a level that most people can't reach and be impractical to command us. Rather, just as a category, I want success. I want good things for me. I want good things for my friend. He cites perhaps the most extreme example of David and Yonasan, which in Pirkei Avos is seen as the prime example of friendship in Tanakh. David and Yonasan is the crown prince, he's supposed to be king, and David was the usurper in the eyes of Shaul and in the eyes of many. And Yonasan says, "No, David, you're going to be king," because he wanted that success for him. That's perhaps an extreme, because maybe Yonasan was going to lose out in that situation. But even just on a lower level for all of us, maybe not that extreme level, is that we want other people to be successful. We shouldn't have a feeling sometimes. You ever have people have this sometimes? I know certain people have come to us with this and saying, "Yeah, I'm really upset. Okay, I got this. I was hoping for this job, and someone else got this job. I've gotten this computer science job at this I've got a coding job at this company. He's got a better company. She got the job at that school when I wanted this. She's a doctor and getting into matched in this program, and I match." You had that feeling, was almost like, I wish I had more. I don't want that person. I want the person to be a little bit less successful than me. They're going to be successful, but less than me. And we should want our friends to be successful, not necessarily at our expense, but that we want success and good for other people. That's perhaps the Ramban's understanding of this mitzvah. So now to go to our next case study.
Okay, and I know that we quoted a few examples, but here's a question that we got, and actually a pretty common one. Dating is rough during COVID, and I don't think I need to say more than that. My friend has met someone on JSwipe, or fill in the blank to another, either another platform or in person, and it's hard for me to hear this. I have pangs of jealousy. And again, this was someone confronting us and saying, I don't know what to do with these feelings. And as was mentioned before, right, this is something that's not necessarily related to this specific question, but have you ever gotten upset about someone who had something that you didn't have, someone in the same industry as you doing better than you? And what we see here, and hopefully what you realize, is that the root of this is jealousy. And that is why the previous pasuk to V'ahavta Re'acha Kamocha is lo sitor, don't bear a grudge. That you have this mitzvah written right before V'ahavta Re'acha Kamocha, because the opposite of bearing a grudge is V'ahavta. Bearing a grudge is the opposite of loving someone. It's being upset, being jealous of someone. And so the question now is, okay, so now that we've discovered what the root is, so how do you get rid of jealousy? Now, the mitzvah of lo sachmo, don't desire, don't covet, can be an entire share in and of itself. And on top of that, and related to that, there is this question of, can you even command a feeling?
Many are bothered by this question about whether you can command emotion. How can I say don't feel an emotion? Is that really something the Torah can command us? Not everyone was bothered by this question. The Sefer HaChinuch and others, right? Of course you can command emotion. That's exactly, a person Kadosh Baruch Hu can command emotion, because we have power to control our emotions, and they weren't really bothered by this question at all. The Chinuch goes out of his way to say, don't ask me the question of how you can control emotion. It is absolutely within our power to control emotion. The Ibn Ezra takes a somewhat different approach. And he argues that what's the idea of lo sachmod, of not being jealous of our friend, is to make the item of source of jealousy, or that which my friend has, removed from me. He gives a mashal of, let's say you have a princess and a pauper. The pauper is not jealous of the princess, of wanting the princess. He knows it's not something that's even within his realm. He may desire the idea of marrying the princess, but it's not something he's actually jealous of, because it's so removed from his stage of life. So it's not something he can possibly desire. Even it's something that you were to ask him in a vacuum, he would want. And that's the idea of lo sachmod, says the Ibn Ezra, that my friend's property, my friend's things, what my friend has in this world, the idea of lo sachmod, the prohibition of lo sachmod, is to make that remove from me. That I look at, that's not something that's even shaykh to me. If you ask me, do I want that car? Maybe I would want it, but when I know that it's my friend, it's removed from me. It's completely outside of what's possible to me. And that's how it's understand this way. So this is even though this is really often used in the context of lo sachmod, of how we can control jealousy, many shir, many divrei Torah, many drashos connect to this, I think it can also explain the mitzvah of v'ahavta recha kamocha, if we use the Ibn Ezra's principle in light of what we saw. If the Isser, the prohibition of lo sachmod, is rooted in the fact that we should look at our friends' property, our friends' things, as removed from us, as outside the realm of things that are connected, that are shaykh to us, perhaps the mitzvah v'ahavta recha kamocha is the opposite. Again, that word recha again is to put their well-being in what I care about. That the idea of v'ahavta recha kamocha is your property, your life, your livelihood, your welfare, your mental health, whatever else, that's something that's shaykh to me. I care about that. And perhaps that's the mitzvah v'ahavta recha kamocha. The same way that I'm afraid of losing something that's mine, I'm afraid that if you lose what's yours. Jealousy, people often understood that it comes from a lack of self-esteem, right? People say like, oh, why are you jealous? Because you're not samech b'chelk, you're not happy with what you have. You suffer from low self-esteem, and that's why you're jealous of other people. And while that's certainly true, that's not the only source of jealousy. Sometimes it can actually be the opposite. It's saying, no, I'm really good, and I deserve this much. It's not low self-esteem, not wishing I had more. It's saying, I am on this level, I should have more, and we're afraid of losing that. And therefore, perhaps the contrast to this is feeling I'm on this level, and so is another person. They should also have good things. Not just we should that I'm happy with what I have and you have what you have, that I believe I'm on this level, that I deserve certain things, and so is my friend, and I want them to have the best. And perhaps that's another approach to the v'ahavta recha kamocha. It's not the sense of it's just okay with what I have. It's more I want more for you, the same way I want more for me. Another approach to the v'ahavta recha kamocha is based on the Rambam. The Rambam considers this a positive commandment, mitzvah saseh. He includes the mitzvah of bikar cholim, visiting the sick, nichma velim, comforting mourners, hachnasas kala, taking care of people to get married, and other mitzvahs are all included in v'ahavta recha kamocha. Those are all mitzvah saseh. Those are all positive mitzvahs, things that we're supposed to do. So how does he understand Hillel's statement in that it's formulated in the negative? Perhaps there's perhaps we can understand there's a progression, because the Rambam perhaps sees the story of the ger coming to Hillel. Perhaps he sees the story of him coming to Hillel again. Back on screen again, right? Yeah. Okay, back on screen again. Perhaps he saw the Hillel as that's the base level. The v'ahavta recha kamocha at its core is that which is bad to you, that which is harmful to you, don't do to someone else. That's the base level. That's what we have to reach first. But then the next step is to do good for others. It's a sur me'ra and then v'asei tov. So you have to start with being at least in the level where I'm not going to harm other people. But the next level is then to seek out this good for others. And perhaps that's the pshat in the end of Hillel's statement, Yidach Perusha Huzil Gamor. Everything else is commentary, go and study it. Often that scene, it's often translated, everything else is just commentary. I don't know if the Rashi wine, I feel like I haven't seen their name in a while. At some point it became popular name wine after various Rishonim, Rambam, Ramban, Abarbanel, Sefarno, Rabbeinu Bachi, I don't know, all different kind of wine companies. Rashi was one of the early ones. Their slogan for Rashi wine used to be everything else is just commentary, which I suppose the joke they were making was everything, all the other wine is just commentary, and also they were Rashi wine, and Rashi is the father of commentators. So I assume that's the joke they were going for, but I've seen that translation for it. It's just commentary. Everything else is just almost icing on the cake. Perhaps the other way of understanding this line of everything else is commentary is everything else is commentary is the expansion of the core principle. Go learn it. Zil Gumor, go study it. That's your obligation, is to take the base level of don't do others and then do more. Do good for other people. But understanding v'ahavta recha kamocha means you're obligated actually to go and do things, and that actually requires you to go out and seek things to do. Perhaps the mitzvah v'ahavta recha kamocha, it's not like the mitzvah of lulav. It's lulav. You command take a lulav, you shake it, and you're done with the mitzvah. Even just picking up the lulav, you're done with the mitzvah already. There's a one-time activity, and you're done. That's it. I hear shofar, I'm done. I'm finished. V'ahavta recha kamocha is a lifetime process. You have to constantly be seeking ways to do good for other people. Every person is different. What's good for them, their welfare changes depending on the person and depending on the time period. What a person needs now is not the same thing they needed 3 months ago or yesterday. And it won't be the same thing in next week. There is no finishing the mitzvah v'ahavta kamocha. I've never gotten to the point, I'm Yoetzet this mitzvah, I'm done. It's a constant life journey because part of the mitzvah is seeking out ways to care for other people. And when last year, when COVID started, and even now as things change daily with medical advice and everything coming, and even when we get back to the new world, whenever that comes, it's going to be different than it was before. It'll be different than the day before. And our obligation to help other people and seek what's good for them, and that's the positive Yaakov Kamocha, to seek and find ways of treating other people well. The negatives, yes, don't do what's bad for other people. That's for sure. That's the base level. That's pretty easy. That's a Sheva al Taisa. That's it. Don't do anything. I know what I wouldn't want, and so I'm not going to do that to other people. But there's more than that. It's seeking out ways of helping other people. That's the obligation of the Haftarech Kamocha. And again, then I go to another, another case study.
Okay, and here yet is something a little more complicated, and we'll hopefully use this as an example to see like a progression of how we apply that on the level of Bein Adam L'Chaver, or the mitzvah of Yahavta L'Reacha Kamocha. My roommate and I have been living together for 3 years. When we first moved into our apartment, we agreed that no guests were allowed after 9:30 p.m. In the past few months since COVID began, my roommate has been working from home and she works until the early evening. Her friends come over at a later time and she doesn't ask them to leave at 9:30. Whenever I remind her of our roommate agreement, she says, I don't see anyone during the day. I work in my bedroom. I need time to socialize with my friends for my emotional and mental health. And the question to us was, so can you guide me in handling this situation? So really unpacking this question was, figuring out what does your roommate need? And I'll start off by saying, yes, this goes both ways. And in any relationship, you should be thinking about the other person, and the other person should be thinking of you, but we're going to take it from one perspective. So you figure out, what does your roommate need? What is your roommate telling you he or she needs? What can you do? And then there's the first step of, so the negative, right? Don't do something. So maybe that means, don't tell them and remind them of your roommate agreement in front of their friends, right? Think about the timing that this is coming up. Think about the tone. And that sur meirah. So don't do the bad things. Don't do harmful things, or even things that you might not think are harmful, but that your roommate interprets as harmful. And then you have the aseh tov, the seeking good and taking a step back and saying, what does my roommate need? What good can I do for my roommate? And yes, this involves a lot of communication skills that we'll talk about actually in a few minutes. And then figure out, so what does your roommate need? And, the roommate said, for my emotional and my mental health, I need that. So think about, can you provide that outlet for your roommate maybe? Or maybe can you say, can we bump it up to 10 o'clock, right? Give your roommate a little bit, more time. So this is just an example of saying how there's so many different parts, and that there's this progression, as we've been saying, in interacting with other people.
The Soloveitchik, Rav Hutner, and others explain this mitzvah, that it's rooted, our ability, our net requirement to do this is rooted in our shared brotherhood, our shared responsibility to other, which again, maybe it's why it's explained Reacha. We love people not because they're great. We love Jewish people not because they're awesome people. Loving people because they're great is an easy thing to do. If people are really nice to us, they're good people, that's really easy. Most people are able to like people who are friendly to them, who are just good people. Mitzvah v'haftarech kamocha is to love people despite their difficulty, to work out these kind of problems in some of the cases we've shared. This isn't, you're failing at the mitzvah. No, this is the mitzvah, that when you're confronted with difficult situations, to find ways of resolving it. Again, we don't love people because they're great. That's not a challenge. It's loving people despite any issues that we have with them. And again, I think it's worth exploring a little further what the mitzvah, how different ways of different people, of how different people have changed over time, and how we need to be seeking out how even to work with difficult people. Sometimes the language is, the language kamocha. Some have pointed to the idea of kamocha, love a person like you, just like you have flaws and you love yourself, hopefully, so too your roommate, your friend, the person that you're involved with, also so you should love them despite that. That's part of the idea of the After Kamocha, is to love them despite any problems, someone you love yourself despite any problems. And that may be also why the mitzvah is framed in the context of Yahavta and the idea of love. Ahavta, again, is an emotional verb. It's saying love. It's a feeling. It's not a particular action. And we saw earlier, if the Rambam defines Yahavta Kamocha as doing Bikur Cholim, doing what we call Gemilas Chasadim, why wouldn't the Torah spell those things out? Why not tell the actions that we're supposed to do with these? Why doesn't it say it? Perhaps the idea is no, because there is no, again, one particular action. Every person needs something different, and every situation requires a different response. The idea of emotion we saw earlier, the Chinuch believed you can command emotion, you can control emotion. How does the Chinuch explain that? How do we control our emotions, our feelings? The major principle of the Chinuch is that achar pulos nimshachos levavos. After our actions, that's where the heart is pulled. And thus when we do activities, when we do actions that represent love, we feel that love for other people. When there are people who we don't necessarily like, or we don't necessarily care for, and despite that we do good things for them, we come to love them. It's not that I love them and then do good things. It's the other way around. I do good things for other people, and then I love them. And that's why it's phrased as v'ahavta. It doesn't give you a particular action. It doesn't tell you to do a particular act. It's that feeling that we're supposed to do actions to other people that will give that emotional feeling. And again, every person requires something different. Every situation requires something different.
So people have come to us, especially during COVID, but not limited to this time, with problems, with challenges that they're having with their roommates, with their friends, interpersonal relationships. And often there's an inability to communicate. And in relationship counseling, there is a popular concept known as the 5 love languages. And here up on screen is the book and the title of the book, called The 5 Love Languages. And the author of the book, Gary Chapman, he has sort of, this is his, very basic theory, that there are five love languages. 5 that people speak different love languages, and physical touch, words of affirmation, meaning saying words like I appreciate you, I love you, thank you, but it's the verbal words that a person needs to hear to feel loved. Acts of service, which means doing things for them. I don't know, an example of washing the dishes, taking out the trash, making a cup of coffee, receiving gifts. Here is a bouquet of flowers. Here's a box of chocolate. Here's a box of pens that I know you just ran out of. Receiving gifts. And then quality time, knowing that person, that you can just have time, a half hour, an hour, whatever the amount of time is, that you just need quality time with that other person. And what Gary Chapman says is that every person has a love language and speaks a love language. And in order for you to be in a relationship with them and to have a strong and good relationship, you need to express your love for them in the language that they speak. If you have the language of your love language is receiving gifts, I can tell you from today and tomorrow how much I appreciate you and how much you do for me and how much I love you, but that you will not feel loved in the way that I think that I'm expressing my love, but you don't feel loved. And the way that the best way to show my love for you would be to buy you gifts and to give you that gift, because that is how you understand and speak. That is your love language. And what Gary Chapman believes is that once you identify and learn about your partner or someone else that you are in a relationship with, once you find out their primary love language, that will enable you to build and sustain a long-lasting, strong relationship. And even though Gary Chapman really writes this in the context of a romantic relationship and the context of marriage, this really applies to anyone that you are in a relationship with. And really, the first step is learning what that other person wants in the relationship, and how that other person can feel that this relationship is important, and that they feel cared for in this relationship. And only when we give encouragement and enable the other person to feel loved, to feel safe, to feel comfortable in the relationship, that is really the important foundation of this relationship. And as I said, this applies to all relationships, all interpersonal relationships, and is not limited to marriage and romantic relationships. Now, this book, The 5 Love Languages, has become canon, and it's a short book, and I highly recommend it to anyone. And a couple of years ago, there was an article written in The Atlantic that actually explained that this book has been misconstrued by the public in recent times, where people are saying, and maybe even you've done this, or maybe you've heard other people say this, well, my love language is this. And this is what I like, this is what I need. And people have actually turned this book and this idea sort of like into a personality test, right? Like similarly to the Myers-Briggs personality test, which was also incredibly popular. I know, like I've taken it numerous times in different programs, and when I was in my psychology classes in college. And in recent years, that has fallen out of favor. And one of the reasons is because people get completely different results whenever they take it. And also because the Myers-Briggs test creates this idea of, this is who I am. This is the type of person that I am, when there's actually nothing helpful or meaningful about that. And here we have the 5 love languages, which the article in The Atlantic was writing about, is that the goal of this book and the goal of finding out the 5 love languages is not to find out who you are, but rather who your partner is, and who the other person in the relationship is, and what they need. So when we have the examples where, people that you roommates, or people that you have relationships with, and we mean that in the broadest sense, when you are having difficulty in your personal relationship, the goal isn't figuring out who I am, I need to sleep late, I need to exercise, but it's figuring out, well, what does the other person need? And that is what V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha is all about. That is the positive side of the mitzvah, as we were saying earlier. And this isn't just a good vart, a good shear on the mitzvah, but this actually dictates how we should be interacting with other people. And I hope that in what we've been saying for the past hour or so has really given some practical ideas and tips of improving and continuing our interpersonal relationships. As we've said, V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha has changed, and our thoughts about this mitzvah has to change because of the modern world, because of the pandemic, and not even with the pandemic. That when in our world of interpersonal relationships, this mitzvah has to do with so many different people, and every person is different, and people change.
And just as a way of concluding with a quote from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory in his book Faith in the Future, just to expand on this idea one step further. The Hebrew Bible contains the great command, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, and is often taken as the basis of biblical morality, but it is not, it is only part of it. The Jewish sages noted that on only one occasion does the Hebrew Bible command us to love our neighbor, but in 37 places it commands us to love the stranger. Our neighbor is one we love because he is like ourselves. The stranger is one we are taught to love precisely because he is not like ourselves. We have to learn to love people even who are not like us, even those who are not kamocha, even those who are not like you. L're'acha kamocha is a constant journey to be doing more, to helping other people who we sometimes can't relate to their struggles, to their problems, to their issues, to their personalities. It's a lifelong struggle, and it's a day-by-day something that we have to be constantly working on. Some of the other topics that you'll be hearing you're hearing over the rest of this conference, like to marriage, children, taras mishpacha. Some of these areas may connect to you more, may connect may not connect to you as much. Sometimes we hear about a struggle someone's going through, and it's hard to understand that, and therefore we may not care as much. But hopefully part of the idea of V'ahavta kamocha and all the other mitzvahs related to loving other people is to think beyond ourselves, to try to think what other people would want, how we can help other people. So once again, I want to thank all the organizers of the conference putting this together, and I thank everyone for listening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Studio. I guess studio. Okay.